My name's Jake, and I've been married to Sarah for 15 years. We live in a peaceful suburb where everyone knows each other, and kids run around until the sun sets. Together, we've built a comfortable life in our cozy two-story home, with a well-kept garden that reflects our hard work. We chose not to have kids, deciding to focus on our relationship and careers. Sarah works as a nurse at the local hospital, while I manage a small but thriving consulting business from home. From the outside looking in, it probably seems like we've got the perfect marriage in a great neighborhood. But the truth is, things haven't been so smooth lately. Over the past few months, I've started noticing subtle shifts in Sarah's behavior. She used to be affectionate and attentive, but now she feels distant, almost like she's distracted. She's spending more and more time on her phone, laughing at messages I never get to see, and she always seems to have new reasons to stay out late. Our once deep and engaging conversations have turned short and rare. Even though I sensed something was off, I tried to convince myself it was just the pressures of work or the monotony of everyday life. The warmth that used to fill our home began to fade, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. The joy and laughter that once echoed through our rooms were replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Even our bedroom, a space that used to bring us closer, felt cold and distant. I tried reaching out to Sarah to understand what was happening, but she brushed off my concerns, telling me she was just tired or overwhelmed by stress. Still, the nagging feeling that something was truly wrong wouldn't go away. The love that once bonded us was slipping, and I was left questioning what had changed. Little did I know, the truth I was about to uncover would tear my world apart. The first real sign that something wasn't right came one Wednesday evening. We used to have movie nights every week, a tradition we'd held on to since the early days of our marriage, but lately, Sarah had been skipping them, saying she was either too exhausted or covering extra shifts at the hospital. That particular night, she told me once again that she'd be working late. Sitting alone on the couch, watching the movie we'd both been eager to see, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at my gut. Earlier that afternoon, Sarah had gotten ready for work with an unusual level of enthusiasm. She had put on more makeup than usual, carefully styled her hair, and even wore perfume. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, telling myself she was just trying to feel good. But when she walked past me without so much as a glance, the knot in my stomach tightened. "Another late shift?" I asked, trying to sound as casual as I could. "Yeah, they're short-staffed again," she said, avoiding eye contact. She quickly grabbed her phone and rushed out the door, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume. As the night dragged on, I found myself replaying all the small changes in her behavior. She had become more secretive with her phone, never letting it out of her sight. When it buzzed with notifications, she'd smile but always hide the screen from me. The late-night shifts and extra hours had become more frequent, and she'd stopped sharing details about her day. One night, I couldn't hold back my curiosity any longer. While Sarah was in the shower, I spotted her phone lying on the nightstand. My hands shook as I picked it up, feeling a surge of guilt for snooping through her personal stuff, but deep down, I knew I had to find out what was really going on. I opened her messaging app and saw the usual conversations with friends and coworkers, but one name jumped out, Nick. I didn't recognize it. Their messages were flirtatious, filled with inside jokes and long, late-night chats. My heart raced as I scrolled through their exchanges, each word feeling like a dagger slicing through me. They talked about meeting up, how much they missed each other. And then, there were photos, pictures of Sarah smiling in a way I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. I dropped the phone back on the table, feeling a mix of rage and sadness welling up inside me. Questions flooded my mind. Who was Nick? How long had this been going on? Was she really working late, or had she been with him all this time? That night, I wanted to confront Sarah, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. When she came out of the shower, unaware of what I had just discovered, she kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed and climbed into bed. The following days were torture. I watched her closely, looking for any signs to confirm what I already knew in my heart. She still seemed distant, and I started noticing more little things that didn't add up. She'd been dressing up more, even on her days off. She spent longer in front of the mirror, taking extra care with her appearance. One evening, she came home later than usual. Her hair was a bit messy, and there was this faint smile on her face, like she'd just had a good time. I sat in the living room, pretending to read, but my attention was locked on the door, waiting for her to walk through. "Good day at work?" I asked, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. She paused for a second, then shrugged it off. "Yeah, just a long day, that's all." I wanted to yell, to demand the truth, but instead, I just nodded and went back to my book. The words were nothing more than a blur as my thoughts spun out of control. I had to know what was really happening, no matter how much it might hurt. The next morning, when Sarah left for work, I made a choice. I was going to follow her, figure out where she was really going. The idea of playing detective in my own marriage made me feel sick, but I couldn't stand living in this uncertainty anymore. After she drove off, I grabbed my keys and trailed behind her, keeping a safe distance. Instead of heading to the hospital, she drove across town to a small cafe I'd never seen before. I parked a little way down the street, watching as she nervously looked around before heading inside. My heart was pounding out of my chest as I debated what to do. Summoning all the courage I had, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the cafe. Peeking through the window, I saw her sitting with a man I assumed must be Nick. They were laughing together, leaning in close. Seeing them like that hit me hard, like a punch right to the gut. It was the confirmation I'd been dreading. I stepped away from the window, my mind racing. The truth of her betrayal was even more painful than I could have ever imagined. The woman I had loved and trusted for all these years was sitting there, sharing an intimate moment with another man, while I stood on the outside, watching everything I thought I knew about my life fall apart. The drive home was a haze of emotions, anger, sadness, and confusion all swirling inside me, leaving me with this bitter, hollow feeling. Every mile felt like it stretched forever, each minute a reminder of the betrayal I had just witnessed. I knew I couldn't confront Sarah right away. I needed something concrete, proof she couldn't deny. In the days that followed, I became consumed with finding the truth. I meticulously collected any evidence I could, determined to figure out just how far Sarah's lies had gone. I discreetly placed a small camera in the living room, hidden among the books, hoping to catch any late-night calls or secret conversations. I pored over our phone bills and noticed she'd been having long calls with numbers I didn't recognize. I even went through her emails and uncovered more messages between her and Nick, each one cutting deeper than the last. One evening, while Sarah was in the shower, I took her phone again. This time, I used an app to recover deleted messages. What I found left me shattered. Explicit texts, photos, and even videos, each one worse than the one before. My hands trembled as I went through them, feeling the bile rise in my throat. The person I saw in those messages wasn't the Sarah I knew. She was someone else, a complete stranger. I saved everything onto a USB drive, creating a digital file of her infidelity. It was everything I needed, the proof that would force her to face the undeniable truth. The final blow came one night when Sarah claimed she had another late shift at work. I followed her again, but this time, I brought a camera. She drove to a hotel on the edge of town, a place where no one would recognize her. I sat in the parking lot, my heart racing as the minutes dragged by. When she finally came out, she wasn't alone. Nick was with her, his arm wrapped around her waist. They laughed together, completely unaware of the world around them, as they headed toward one of the rooms. I snapped a few photos, capturing the intimate moment, then waited until they disappeared inside before driving away. Back at home, I stared at the photos, a storm of anger and heartbreak churning inside me. There was no going back now. I had all the evidence I needed to confront her, to lay bare the betrayal that had destroyed our marriage. The next morning, I set up the camera in the living room, making sure it would capture everything. I wanted a record of this confrontation, a testament to the truth. When Sarah walked in that evening, I was ready. I sat on the couch, holding the USB drive, waiting for her to sense the tension in the air. She didn't notice at first, her smile as fake as the lies she'd been feeding me. "Hey," she said, her voice too casual for what was coming. "What's going on?" "Sit down," I replied, my tone icy and unyielding. "We need to talk." She hesitated, clearly picking up on the seriousness of the situation, then sat down across from me. "What's this all about, Jake?" I took a deep breath, bracing myself. I know about you and Nick. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice shaky. Don't play dumb, Sarah, I said, my voice sharp, as I tossed the USB drive onto the table between us. I have everything, your texts, your emails, even photos of you two at the hotel. Stop lying and start telling the truth. She sat in silence for a moment, glancing between me and the USB drive. Then she crossed her arms, her expression hardening. Fine, she said, her voice tight. Yes, I've been seeing Nick, but it's not what you think. I let out a bitter laugh. Not what I think. Sarah, I've seen the messages. I've seen the photos. You've been cheating on me for months. She shifted in her seat, her defensiveness giving way to something more desperate. It's not like that, Jake. We never. Don't. I cut her off, my voice quivering with anger. Don't insult my intelligence. You've been sneaking around, lying to me, behind my back. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I'm sorry, Jake, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never meant for this to happen. I was just lonely. You were always so busy with work, and I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood. So, you turned to him? I asked, my voice rising with frustration. You couldn't come to me? We could have figured this out together, but instead, you decided to betray me. I know, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Her apologies felt hollow, like she was only trying to salvage the shattered remains of what was left between us. I couldn't stand to look at her any longer, so I stood up. Sorry doesn't cut it, Sarah. You've destroyed everything we built. I want you out of this house by tomorrow. We're done. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Jake, please don't do this. We can fix it. I'll do anything. I shook my head, my decision firm. It's too late. You made your choice, and now you have to deal with the consequences. Tomorrow, I'll be contacting a lawyer to start the divorce process. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her crying on the couch. The weight of her betrayal was crushing, but deep down, I knew I was making the right choice. Our marriage was over, and there was no going back. The next morning, after that gut-wrenching argument, the house felt unbearable. I woke up early, too restless to sleep, and made my way to the kitchen to brew some coffee. Normally, the smell of fresh coffee gave me a little comfort, but today, it felt empty, hollow. Sarah's presence was everywhere, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I heard her footsteps coming down the stairs, and my body tensed, knowing another confrontation was coming. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes swollen and red from crying all night. We stood there in silence for a moment, the air thick with everything unsaid. Jake, she started, her voice shaky. Can we please talk? I inhaled deeply, trying to keep my composure. There's nothing left to say, Sarah. You've already made your decision. But I love you, she pleaded, stepping closer. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. Love? I echoed bitterly, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Is this what you call love? Lying to me, sneaking around, sleeping with another man? How is that love? Her face crumpled, but I couldn't let myself soften. I needed answers, not more empty excuses. Why, Sarah? Why did you do it? Was I really such a terrible husband? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, Jake, you were amazing. But you were always so focused on work, always providing for us. I felt alone, and Nick was there. You could have told me that, I said, my voice growing louder. You could have talked to me, shared how you were feeling. We could have worked through it together. But instead, you chose to cheat. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I was weak, and I made a terrible mistake. But I still love you, Jake. I don't want to lose you. I shook my head, unable to contain my anger any longer. Love doesn't excuse betrayal. You've destroyed everything we had. I want you to pack your things and leave today. She stared at me, a mix of shock and desperation in her eyes. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have anywhere. That's not my problem, I said coldly. Go to Nick for all I care. Just get out. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then seemed to realize it was pointless. With a defeated nod, she turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard her footsteps retreating upstairs, followed by the sounds of drawers opening and closing as she packed her things. I sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, the weight of the situation bearing down on me. I knew this was the right decision, but it didn't make it any less painful. A few hours later, Sarah came down the stairs, suitcase in hand. She stood by the front door, her face a mixture of regret and sorrow. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never wanted it to end like this. I couldn't respond. Words failed me as I tried to process the depth of my pain. She stood there for a moment, waiting for some sign of forgiveness, but I remained silent. With a final, heart-wrenching look, she turned and quietly walked out, closing the door softly behind her. The house felt emptier than ever. I wandered from room to room, each space echoing with memories of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else. Eventually, I found myself in our bedroom, the place where we'd once shared so much. Now, it was just a cold, vacant space. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall, my mind spinning with a storm of emotions. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on the practical stuff. I reached out to a lawyer and began the process of filing for divorce. I had to break the news to our families and friends, and with each conversation, it felt like the wound of betrayal was ripped open all over again. Most people were in disbelief, shocked that Sarah, who had always seemed so loyal, could do something so hurtful. About a week after Sarah left, I got an unexpected phone call from Nick. The sound of his voice made my blood boil. There's nothing to talk about, I said, struggling to keep my anger in check. You've already done enough. I get it, you're mad, he replied, unfazed by my frustration. But this isn't just about you and Sarah. It's about us too. Us? I asked, stunned. There is no us, Nick. You destroyed my marriage. He sighed, as if he were the one who had been wronged. Sarah and I, we have a connection. I think we need to clear the air and figure out how we're going to move forward. There's nothing to figure out, I shot back. You can have her. I want nothing to do with either of you. There was a brief pause before he said, fine. But just so you know, Sarah and I are planning to make it official. We're going to be together. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of hearing my pain. Good luck with that, I said coldly and hung up. The days that followed were a blur. Legal meetings, lonely dinners, sleepless nights. The divorce process was draining, but I pushed through it, determined to reclaim my life. I threw myself into work, hoping it would numb the ache inside. But every time I came home, the silence of the house was a brutal reminder of what I had lost. One afternoon, I got a message from Sarah. It was the first time she'd reached out since leaving. Can we talk? It said. I stared at the screen, torn between the anger still simmering inside me and the need for some kind of closure. After a few minutes, I typed a simple response, okay. We met at a small cafe nearby, a neutral spot where we could talk without the weight of our past pressing down on us. She looked tired, her eyes red and puffy, like she'd been crying for days. We sat down, and the silence between us was thick and uncomfortable. Jake, I know I can't undo what I did, she started, her voice shaky, but I need you to know how truly sorry I am. I never meant to hurt you. You did hurt me, I replied, my voice hard and cold. You broke my trust, destroyed our marriage. Sorry doesn't fix that. She nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I know, and I don't expect forgiveness, but you have to understand, it wasn't just about you. I was unhappy, lonely. I felt like I was losing myself. Then why didn't you come to me? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. Why turn to him instead of trying to work things out with me? I tried, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But every time I brought it up, you were too busy or too tired. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter. Her words cut deep, but I knew there was some truth in them. I had thrown myself into work, trying to provide for us, but in doing so, I had overlooked her needs. It didn't justify what she did, but it made me see things a bit differently. I can't change the past, Sarah, I said, my voice softer now. I hope you find whatever it is you've been looking for. I just need to move on. She nodded, wiping away her tears. I understand. I wish you the best, Jake. I really do. We sat there in silence for a few more moments, the weight of our shared history lingering in the air. Then, with one last bittersweet goodbye, we both walked away. As I made my way back to my car, I felt an odd sense of relief. The conversation had been painful, but it brought me the closure I needed. That chapter with Sarah was done, and it was time to begin a new one. The days slowly turned into weeks, and while the confrontation with Sarah had given me some closure, the anger inside me wouldn't die. It simmered, a constant reminder of the betrayal and the years of deceit. I found myself fixating on it, replaying every conversation, every red flag I had ignored. And soon, the idea of revenge started to creep in, whispering promises of justice, of payback. One night, as I scrolled through Sarah's social media profiles, I stumbled upon Nick's page. He had made their relationship public, proudly posting pictures of them together, smiling and carefree. The sight made my blood boil. They had moved on so fast, parading their new life while leaving mine in ruins. Fueled by rage, I began to plot my revenge. I knew it wouldn't erase the pain or bring back the time I'd lost, but it might give me some sense of justice, a retribution for everything they had done to me. The first step was to dig up information. I spent hours researching both Sarah and Nick, finding out everything I could about their lives. Nick was a high-ranking executive at a marketing firm, a position that made him vulnerable to public scrutiny. I created a fake online persona and used it to connect with people in his professional circle. It didn't take long to gather details about his work habits, his favorite spots, and even information about his colleagues and competitors. Armed with this knowledge, I started planting small but damaging rumors, subtly chipping away at his reputation. I knew Sarah cared deeply about her job at the hospital and the respect she had among her coworkers, so I sent anonymous tips to the hospital's administration, hinting that she was involved in unethical behavior. I suggested drug use, inappropriate relationships with patients, and negligence. I knew these accusations would lead to an investigation and tarnish her professional life. The final piece of my plan was to expose their affair to the world. I built a website, carefully documenting every bit of evidence I had collected, the texts, the emails, the photos. Then, I linked it to anonymous emails I sent out to their friends, families, and colleagues. I wanted everyone to see the truth, to know exactly who Sarah and Nick really were. About a month after I had set my plan in motion, I got a phone call from a mutual friend, Mark. His voice was filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Jake, have you seen it?" "Seen what?" I asked, playing innocent. "The website," he replied. "It has all these messages and pictures of them. It's all over social media now. People are talking about it everywhere." I acted surprised and told him I'd check it out. After hanging up, I felt a grim satisfaction wash over me. My plan was working. The perfect little world that Sarah and Nick had built was beginning to crumble. Over the next few days, I overheard bits of conversations from mutual friends and saw posts online buzzing about the scandal. Sarah and Nick scrambled to do damage control, but the more they tried to deny it, the more people became interested in all the dirty details. Sarah was suspended from her job, pending an investigation, and Nick's company released a statement distancing themselves from the mess. One evening, my phone rang, and it was Sarah. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. Her voice was a blend of anger and desperation. "Jake, please, take down the site. You've done enough." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said coldly. "Don't play games," she snapped. "I know it was you. You put up that website. You're trying to ruin us." "Ruin you?" I laughed bitterly. "You and Nick ruined us, Sarah. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." "Jake, please," she pleaded, her tone softening. "This has gone too far. You're destroying our lives." "You destroyed mine first," I replied sharply. "Now you're just getting a taste of what that feels like." She went quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. "I never wanted things to end like this. I'm sorry for what I did, but this revenge, It won't make you feel better. Maybe not, I said, but it's a start. I hung up, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and emptiness. The revenge gave me some satisfaction, but it didn't heal the deeper wounds. It was just a temporary salve on a scar that ran far deeper. In the following weeks, the fallout from the scandal only intensified. Sarah's suspension turned into a full termination, and Nick faced mounting pressure at work. Their once public relationship began to crack under the weight of public judgment and their own personal guilt. One night, I received a message from Nick. It was long and filled with rambling apologies, regret and self-pity spilling onto the screen. He begged me to take the website down, saying they just wanted to move on. I read his message and then deleted it without responding. They had to face the consequences of their actions, just as I had faced the consequences of their betrayal. Revenge, I realized, was a double-edged sword. It had given me a taste of justice, but it also kept me tethered to the pain and anger of the past. It was time to let go and move forward, to find a new beginning. So, I took down the website and deleted all the evidence I had gathered. As I did, I felt a strange sense of release. The revenge had run its course, and now it was time to focus on healing and rebuilding my life. Sarah and Nick would have to deal with the mess they had created, while I would start fresh, free from the shadow of their betrayal. With revenge behind me, I set my sights on moving forward, but there was one final thing I needed: closure. Not just from the satisfaction of revenge, but a real conversation with Sarah that would help me let go of the anger and finally heal. One rainy afternoon, I called her and asked if she would meet me at a local park. She hesitated, but eventually agreed. The park was deserted, the rain keeping everyone inside. I sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree, watching the rain fall and listening to the distant roll of thunder. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, looking worn down by everything: the scandal, the loss of her job, the collapse of our marriage. She approached slowly, leaving a noticeable distance between us. She gave a small nod, not quite meeting my eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk after everything," she said, her voice tentative. "I think we need to," I replied, taking a deep breath. "There's a lot we haven't said." She looked up briefly, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and sadness. "I know, I don't even know where to begin," she said, her voice shaky. "Why, Sarah? Why did you do it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, her gaze falling to her hands. "I've asked myself that same question so many times. I felt lost. You were always so caught up in work, and I started to feel like I was fading into the background. Nick, he made me feel seen, like I mattered." "I get that," I replied, surprised by the calmness in my own voice. "But why didn't you talk to me? We could have worked through it together." "I tried," she said softly, barely above a whisper. "But every time I brought it up, you were too tired or busy. And then, after a while, it just became easier to open up to Nick. I know it doesn't justify what I did. I'm truly sorry, Jake." For the first time, I could hear the sincerity in her apology. I saw the guilt and regret she carried. "I'm sorry too, Sarah," I said quietly. "I should have been more present. But that doesn't undo what happened." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know how much I regret it all. I've lost so much because of my mistakes." We sat there in silence for a while, the soft rain pattering down around us. Finally, I broke the quiet, asking, "So, what are you going to do now?" She shrugged, wiping her tears. "I don't know. I lost my job, and my reputation's pretty much destroyed. Nick and we're not together anymore. The whole scandal tore us apart." Surprisingly, hearing that didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it might. Instead, I just felt a strange sense of pity. "I really hope you find a way to move forward," I said sincerely. "For what it's worth, I don't want you to suffer. I just wanted you to understand the pain you caused." "I do," she whispered, her voice heavy with regret. "I understand now, and I'm truly sorry." Her genuine apology brought a sense of closure I didn't expect. The anger I'd held onto for so long began to fade, leaving behind an emptiness, but also a sense of peace. "I think it's time for both of us to move on," I said, standing up. I wish you the best, Sarah. She stood too, looking at me with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Thank you, Jake. I hope you find happiness again. With a final nod, I turned and walked away, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The rain had stopped, and the sun was starting to break through the clouds. It felt symbolic, as though the storm of our relationship had finally passed, leaving room for new beginnings. Back home, I thought over our conversation. It hadn't erased the hurt, but it had brought a deeper understanding and much-needed closure. Sarah had made her choices, and I had made mine. Now, it was time to focus on my own path, free from the bitterness of betrayal and revenge. That evening, I sat in the living room and flipped through old photos. I saw the moments of happiness, the laughter, and the love we once shared. It was bittersweet, but it reminded me that life goes on, and new memories can be made. I wasn't defined by Sarah's betrayal. I was defined by my ability to rise above it. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate, and I was ready for it. That final conversation with Sarah had given me the closure I needed, and now, it was time to rebuild. The weeks after our last conversation were a whirlwind of emotions and legal battles. The divorce process was tough, but it was necessary. My lawyer, Marcia, a sharp and empathetic woman, guided me through every step, making sure I came out of this ordeal as intact as possible. The court date arrived on a gray, cloudy morning. I dressed in my best suit, hoping to project an air of calm and confidence, even though I was still battling a storm of emotions inside. As I drove to the courthouse, my thoughts wandered back to the years Sarah and I had spent together, and I couldn't help but wonder how it had all come to this. The courthouse was an imposing, somber building, its heavy atmosphere matching the gravity of the situation. I went through the metal detectors and made my way to the courtroom, where I found Marcia waiting. She greeted me with a reassuring smile, which helped steady the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Sarah arrived shortly after, looking pale and worn down, with her lawyer in tow, a man who seemed distant, almost indifferent to the case. We avoided eye contact, the weight of everything that had happened between us hanging heavy in the air. The trial began with the judge, a stern but fair woman, explaining the proceedings. Marcia laid out our case with precision, presenting the evidence of Sarah's infidelity and how it had devastated our marriage. She spoke about my efforts, my commitment, and made it clear just how deeply Sarah's betrayal had affected me. Sarah's lawyer tried to shift the blame onto me, arguing that my long work hours had pushed her to seek comfort elsewhere. It stung to hear, but Marcia swiftly dismantled that argument, pointing out that no marriage is perfect, yet infidelity is always a choice, not a consequence of circumstance. As the trial went on, witnesses were called to testify. Colleagues and even a few neighbors shared their observations of our marriage. Their testimonies were a mixed bag, some supporting Sarah's narrative of feeling lonely and neglected, while others spoke to my dedication, despite the challenges we'd faced. When Sarah took the stand, her voice shook as she gave her account. She spoke about her feelings of isolation, her regret for the affair, and her desire to make amends. Her words carried weight, but they couldn't undo the damage that had already been done. When it was my turn, I took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. I talked about our early years, the love we once shared, and how things had slowly fallen apart. I admitted my own shortcomings, but I made it clear that Sarah's betrayal had shattered the foundation of our marriage, trust. The judge listened carefully, her face unreadable throughout. After what felt like an eternity, she called for a recess to deliberate. The courtroom emptied, and I found a quiet corner to gather my thoughts. Marcia joined me, her calm presence a source of comfort. "You did great, Jake," she said. "No matter what happens, know that you've done everything you could." I nodded, appreciating her support. The wait felt endless, but finally, we were called back into the courtroom. The judge returned to her seat, her gaze sweeping over both sides before she spoke. "Divorce is never easy," she began, her voice firm but empathetic. "It's clear that both parties have endured a great deal. However, based on the evidence, I've reached my decision." She outlined the terms of the divorce. I was awarded a fair share of our assets, including a significant portion of our savings. Sarah was ordered to cover part of my legal fees due to her infidelity. Most importantly, I was granted ownership of the house. It had been my home, my refuge, and a symbol of stability through everything. As the judge finished, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The legal battle was finally over. While the emotional wounds would take longer to heal, this was a huge step toward starting fresh. Outside the courthouse, I stood with Marcia, feeling the weight of the trial begin to lift from my shoulders. Sarah walked past me, her expression a mix of regret and resignation. For a moment, I thought about saying something, but the words wouldn't come. I watched as she walked away, a chapter of my life closing behind her. Marcia placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You did great, Jake," she said. "Now it's time to focus on the future." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Thank you, Marcia, for everything." Marcia smiled. "It's my job. But remember, the real work starts now. Healing and rebuilding, it's a journey, but you're stronger than you think." I reflected on her words. The divorce had tested me in ways I never expected, but it also forged a sense of strength and resilience within me. I was free from the chains of betrayal, ready to embrace the future with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, as I stood in my living room, I looked at everything with fresh eyes. What had once felt like a reminder of a failed marriage now felt like a sanctuary for new beginnings. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it with determination. The trial had been the last major hurdle in a long, painful journey. Now that it was behind me, I could finally focus on healing and rediscovering who I was, without the shadows of the past looming over me. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. I was ready to rebuild, to find happiness and peace on my own terms. With the legalities behind me, I threw myself into the process of rebuilding my life. The house, once filled with memories of betrayal, now felt like a blank canvas, a place where I could create new memories and carve out a fresh path. Over the next few weeks, I decluttered, getting rid of items that weighed down my spirit and redecorated to reflect my new beginning. Each change was a small but powerful step toward reclaiming my space and sense of self. The process became therapeutic, painting walls, moving furniture around, picking out new decor. It gave me a sense of control and purpose, a way to symbolically and physically clear out the remnants of a broken marriage and replace them with pieces of my new life. Friends and family were there for me, offering support and company to remind me that I wasn't alone in this. One Saturday, while I was painting the living room, my sister Claire showed up with lunch. We sat on the floor, eating takeout and talking about everything except the past. Claire had always been a solid presence in my life, and her being there reminded me that I still had people who cared deeply about me. "So, what's next for you?" Claire asked, taking a sip of her soda. I shrugged, glancing around the room. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I guess I'm just trying to figure out who I am now, outside of being someone's husband." Claire smiled, understanding in her eyes. "You've got a fresh start, Alex. Take your time. Try new things. Meet new people. You deserve to find happiness." Her words stayed with me that evening as I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I made a promise to myself to embrace this new chapter. It was time to step out of my comfort zone and explore the possibilities that lay ahead. The first step was joining a local hiking group. I'd always enjoyed being outdoors, and the group gave me a chance to meet new people while staying active. The first few hikes were challenging, not just physically, but mentally, as I pushed myself to engage with strangers. But gradually, I began to feel a sense of camaraderie and belonging. One person, in particular, caught my attention, a woman named Rachel. She was kind, funny, and had a way of making everyone feel at ease. We often ended up walking side by side, sharing stories and laughing together. Her presence was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that life could be filled with joy again. "Why did you join the group?" she asked one day as we hiked up a steep trail. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. I went through a tough divorce. I needed something to help me move forward. Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get it. I went through a rough breakup too. This group has been a lifeline for me." Her openness put me at ease, and we found ourselves talking more about our experiences, finding comfort in our shared struggles. As the weeks passed, our friendship deepened, and I began to look forward to our hikes and the easy conversations we had along the way. Outside of hiking, I started exploring other interests. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted to try but had never made time for. Capturing the world through a camera lens gave me a fresh perspective, helping me see beauty in the details I'd often overlooked. Through these new activities, I began to reconnect with parts of myself that I'd long ignored. I rediscovered my love for cooking, experimenting with new recipes, and hosting small dinners for friends. Each meal felt like a little celebration of progress, a reminder that life moves forward and time has a way of healing. One evening, after a particularly good hike, Rachel and I decided to grab coffee. We sat in a cozy cafe, sipping our drinks and chatting about anything and everything. As we talked, it hit me just how much my life had changed. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer dictated my every thought. I had found new interests, new friendships, and a renewed sense of self-worth. "Alex, have you thought about dating again?" Rachel asked, her eyes filled with curiosity. I chuckled, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I've thought about it, but honestly, it's a bit overwhelming. Starting over is scary." Rachel smiled, her warmth reassuring. "It is scary, but it can also be amazing. There's no rush. When you're ready, you'll know." Her words gave me comfort. I wasn't in a hurry to jump into a new relationship, but the idea didn't feel as impossible as it once had. For now, I was content with the friendships I was building and the joy I was finding in my new activities. As the months rolled by, I continued to grow and heal. I learned to enjoy my own company, to find peace in solitude, and strength in independence. I traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, capturing moments with my camera and making memories that were entirely my own. One crisp autumn morning, I found myself standing on top of a mountain, the world stretching out beneath me. The air was cool and clear, and the landscape was vibrant with the fiery colors of the season. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for how far I had come. The journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. Looking back, I realized that Sarah's betrayal, as devastating as it was, had been a turning point. It forced me to take stock of my life, to rediscover who I was and what I wanted. It taught me the value of resilience, the importance of self-love, and the courage to start over. Standing there on that mountaintop, I promised myself that I would keep moving forward. I would embrace the uncertainty of the future with hope and optimism. Life was unpredictable, but it was also filled with endless potential. As I made my way back down the mountain, I felt lighter, freer. The past no longer held me captive. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing I had the strength to face it. The new life I was building wasn't just about recovering. It was about growing, discovering, and finding happiness. In that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Second story. Last week, something happened that I still can't quite wrap my head around. My wife, Megan, and I have been married for 5 years. Like any couple, we've had our ups and downs, but I always believed we were on solid ground. Turns out, I was wrong. Megan recently made a new friend named Tom. They met at the gym a few months ago, and at first, I didn't think much of it. Tom seemed like a decent guy, and I trusted Megan completely. But over time, Megan started spending more and more time with him. They'd go for runs together, grab coffee, and hang out more often than I was comfortable with. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. That was until last Tuesday. Megan had a work trip lined up to a nearby city, and she was supposed to be gone for 3 days. On the first night, she texted me to let me know she'd arrived safely and was heading out to dinner with some colleagues. I was happy she seemed to be enjoying herself. Later that same evening, I decided to go to a bar near our house for a drink, just to relax. When I walked in, I couldn't believe my eyes. There was Tom, sitting at a corner table, and Megan was with him. They hadn't seen me, and I didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching them, laughing and talking like they were having a very intimate conversation. My heart dropped. I felt sick. Quietly, I took a few photos with my phone and left, feeling like my world was crashing down around me. The next morning, Megan came back, acting like everything was perfectly fine. I didn't waste any time. I showed her the pictures. She broke down immediately, admitting that she'd been seeing Tom behind my back for months. She confessed that they had been planning to run away together during her so-called work trip. I was completely shattered. I told her to leave and filed for divorce the very next day. Since then, I've lost a lot of faith in people, and I have no idea how to even begin moving forward. I guess this is just my life now.